And so one last housekeeping thing, man. Tell the people what to do.
You all already know. And if you're down with the vibes, hit the notification bell and subscribe.
Ding. You know, I don't mind being wrong, especially when, you get, it's a win-win kind of sort of, it's a win-win bet. I like making those bets. But
are you talking about
lose, sometimes you got to lose something. I almost smoothie. I almost smoothie.
Yeah, you already know.
Smoothie, man. I'm getting my kid size smoothie. But
nah, man, I need that extra large.
You need an extra large, man. See, that's how people do you, man. But I was pleasantly surprised. I thought Caleb Plant and Canelo wasn't going to be a really competitive fight. Not because Caleb Plant didn't have skill. I just really thought Canelo was a bad matchup style. And I have to give all the props to Caleb Plant. Like, he put on a great masterclass boxing, defensive performance, really from rounds 1 through 9, in my opinion.
Best we've ever seen him.
You could see Canelo getting closer and closer, but he really, really put on a great performance. I haven't seen somebody roll and pick punches like that effectively since Mayweather. You know what I'm saying?
Facts.
I doubted his footwork. I didn't doubt Caleb Plant's upper body movement. I didn't doubt his counter punching. I just didn't think he had the feet to really get away from Canelo. And he eventually got caught, but I think if he would have been I think he got comfortable with Canelo because he was picking off punches so much, and he got comfortable and got caught, and magically, all I'll say is Canelo's powers traveled from 147 to 168. So, what you got on it, JD?
Hey, man, I agree wholeheartedly, man. I think it was an amazing performance by, I would say, both fighters. I was impressed by what Caleb Plant did, though. I have to admit, I think he most definitely outdid people's expectations when he stepped from what they thought was going to happen when he stepped in that ring. Many people, when they made this fight, expected for it to be a wipeout within maybe the first 5 or 6 rounds. But we saw a Caleb Plant, like you said, I immediately was shocked when I saw how effective his defense was with this Mayweather shoulder roll. I mean, there was a couple of times that he literally caught Canelo's left hook on his glove and shot that straight right back down the pipe at Canelo.
Ooh, it was beautiful.
I have to admit, man, I was totally surprised by what Caleb Plant displayed. Now, I will say with Canelo, it kind of did go kind of like I suspected with Canelo. I figured ultimately, with Canelo, his power shots are so devastating that I figured at some point later in the fight, and unfortunately, it did transpire. He clipped Caleb Plant with that devastating shot, and Caleb Plant just simply couldn't recover. I have to admit, man, I am one of those people. When it got to the 10th round, I was hoping against hope that Caleb Plant would not get clipped with a shot and would be able to at least say that he got through 12 rounds with Canelo Alvarez, because I think everybody felt like Canelo was going to win on the cards anyway. So I was hoping that, that Caleb Plant would at least have that kind of feather in his cap that, hey, man, I was one of the fighters, along with Triple G, Lara, and a few others who I went 12 rounds and, I was able to kind of move around enough to survive. But unfortunately, he got him. It was a much better fight than I could have anticipated, man. But I'll say, man, it was an awesome fight, man. Shout out to Canelo and Caleb Plant. I definitely want to see Caleb Plant back in the ring.
Right.
Because now, tell me how you feel, but I'm going to be honest, man. Outside of Canelo Alvarez at 168, I feel like from what I saw Caleb Plant display, I give him the edge over most everybody else at 168.
Yeah, because the question is, who has that Canelo power? Because that's what really carried Canelo to victory.
Right.
Now, don't get me wrong, Canelo has great head movement, but I think we've seen in his last two fights with two very talented super middleweights in Billy Joe Saunders, and even more so now Caleb Plant. I think we saw that you can outbox Canelo. What it comes down to is you're probably not going to be stronger than him.
Right.
And Tank tweeted out something interesting, which he made a comparison, and I was like, kind of right. He's 20.
He compared himself to
yeah.
Canelo?
He said Canelo was me at 168, and I thought about it, and I was even thinking about the Mario Barrios fight. I'm like,
right.
He has a point. You know, his power is carrying him to victory. And don't get me wrong, man. Like Canelo is supremely talented. Like, I mean, he's able to really put together fights and combinations, and you could recognize his talent. I remember the first time I saw him fight, it might have been like 2000, maybe 10. Yeah, it might have been earlier than that. He was fighting Miguel Cotto's brother on a undercard. I think it was the Marquez. No, it was the Hatton Pacquiao fight. And I was like, man, this kid has great hands. And those hands have never left him. But one thing I have noticed is as he's gone up from 147 to 175, he doesn't throw as many combinations, right?
No, right.
He's relying a lot on his power. And I pose this question not to just stir the pot, but just to really like, I've been watching boxing since I've been a kid. I don't think I've ever seen somebody that light of weight jump that many weight classes and their power increase. I just never seen that. I mean, and shout out to Canelo, because he's figured out a way to do it. Like he's figured out a way from coming 147 to increase his knockout ratio in every weight class. And it really took a jump once he got into 168. It seems to be a weight he's comfortable at. Even at 175, Cole was losing the fight against Kovalev. And I think in that point, the Tank Davis, he was kind of on to something. So, I mean, devastating punch dropped Kovalev. So, what are your thoughts on it? Because Canelo is always, I will say this, and this is one thing why he's the pay-per-view king. And he's going to be the most recognized fighter probably of the last, 5 years, besides, of course, Mayweather and Pacquiao. And probably for the next 5 years on, because Canelo never disappoints. But give me your thoughts on it, like him jumping the weight classes, his power carrying up, like it's amazing. There's speculations, you don't want to cast anything on anybody without any more proof, I should say. But nah, man, he's truly an amazing fighter, and you gotta hats off to him, man. He's unified, and I just floor is yours, man. I'm speechless. He's handling his business.
That's an interesting thing that Tank would tweet, because I kind of it makes a lot of sense, because I think if all boxing observers are honest, we have watched fights where we have seen Canelo Alvarez get outboxed at moments, but there's never been a doubt yet, like you said, that his power is going to come through and save the day. You could almost say too that at this point, even in the fight against Caleb Plant, I really didn't even see much of Canelo Alvarez working off of the jab. I really don't think I saw many jabs thrown by Canelo Alvarez. It was simple head movement, and at the end of the day, he knew that he was going to close in and that he was going to land those bombs that was ultimately going to make Caleb Plant wilt. So, but I got to say this, man, and this is to a lot of the boxing fans out there, a lot of the people in boxing, and I got to call it fair the way I see it personally. I'm not saying that I'm right, but I got to call it fair the way I see it. And let me just lay this out for a number of people if we call it fair. So everybody right now is saying that Canelo Alvarez is the top pound for pound fighter, right? Right now, I say he's the top pound for pound fighter by default, but he shouldn't be. And I'm gonna say why he shouldn't be.
Okay, please. I want to hear this one.
Right. I'm gonna tell you why he shouldn't be. First off, if every observer is fair and unbiased, while a lot of people say that his only loss was to Floyd Money Mayweather, if you are truly fair and unbiased, he lost to Islande Lara, who he never rematched. Then I'll take it a step further. If people are fair and unbiased, Canelo Alvarez versus Gennady Golovkin won. He lost that fight.
He need to hold that L.
That they called a draw, right? Then I'll take it a step further. Okay? Most boxing fans, and if you're listening to this, I dare you in the comments to tell me what fighter could really pull this off. In 2018, after he arguably should have lost to Gennady Golovkin, after being tested for his previous 12 fights, right, for drugs, right, somehow, randomly after the most difficult test of his career against Gennady Golovkin,
probably the most physically the strong opponent he's faced, yeah.
Exactly, against the most physically strong opponent he's ever faced, the most difficult probably too. Maybe you could say Lara and some of them who maybe outboxed him might have been difficult too, but like you said, definitely the most physically strong opponent. He magically now suddenly gets popped for steroids, right? And it blows my mind. And I have to salute Canelo and his team and a lot of fans who've done a great job of sweeping this under the rug. But I got to keep it 100, people. There is no fighter out there.
Speak on it.
There is no fighter out there that only 2 or 3 years ago could get popped for steroids, and only a couple years later, the whole boxing world will call them the #1 pound for pound fighter. Let's imagine for a second, boxing fans. Let's imagine that the great Manny Pacquiao,
oh, come on now, yeah,
would have ever tested positive for any type of steroid. Everybody would have blasted Manny and said that was the reason why Manny Pac-Man Pacquiao carried up so much power and was blistering people at welterweight. Nobody would have sat there and said that Manny Pacquiao deserved to be top pound for pound if he had ever gotten popped for steroids.
There would have been a question mark. Yeah, people putting question marks, and he's never popped positive for anything.
Exactly. Yeah. I'll take it to even some of the more current fighters, right? You all tell me if anybody would respect a Terence Bud Crawford,
right?
A Errol Spence Jr.,
right?
A plethora of fighters, a Lomachenko, a Teofimo Lopez. We can go down the list of a lot of different fighters, and if only a couple of years ago, they got popped for steroids, nobody this quickly would suddenly act like they have amnesia and be calling that fighter the top pound for pound in boxing. Now, I know it's going to be unpopular because I know you have, former fighters in the division like Andre Ward and a number of ex-fighters, probably Floyd Mayweather, a number of fighters who are sitting back and they're looking at this and they're like, They're like, it's unpopular. We're not going to come out and say it. Because if we come out and say it, the fans are going to jump down our neck.
Like we hate, like we're hating.
Like they're going to come down our neck like we're hating. But a lot of these ex-fighters have to be looking at this and thinking to themselves, low key, if that had been me blasting people and I got popped for steroids, there's no way they would have kept me up at top pound for pound.
Right. Listen, here's the thing. When Margarito got hit, they found he had the Acme Acres cement gloves on.
Right.
His reputation was ruined.
And
it was actually never truly. Well, he got caught against Sugar Shane Mosley. They caught it, but then they also attributed that to the Miguel Cotto fight. And they were like, oh, yeah, you see, he had, the gauze doesn't crack and all that stuff. So they he was labeled a cheater for the rest of his career. He was really because he was really building a name for himself, and there was a time where a lot of people wanted to see him versus Mayweather. They're like, oh, Mayweather's ducking this and that and the third, and then he gets exposed to, maybe he's, a cheater,
Right,
not like, hey, this is a one-time deal. Because my thing is, I don't remember. Maybe Sugar Shane Mosley was the last guy. I don't know the last fighter who was just when they got popped came out and said, yeah, I cheated.
Right, exactly. Nobody.
Yeah. So I'm not taking anything away from Canelo in the sense that he's not a great boxer. But and this is for the people listening, YouTube, Spotify, Stitcher, you name it, like I always say. If anybody it can name me a time in boxing history that they've seen a fighter jump up, 28 pounds, from a welterweight to all the way to light heavy, and their power increases, right? Your power carries all the way up, and you actually become a more dangerous puncher, 3, 4, and 5 weight classes heavier. Inform me. I would love to know. I know a lot of cruiserweights go to heavyweight, and then you see them, and they're not the biggest punchers. Like even Evander Holyfield was a tough, rugged guy, but he wasn't the biggest puncher in the world, And so there are weight classes for a reason. And the thing that always gives me pause to cause, besides the drug test that was positive, the thing that just causes me to kind of take a step back is if you go back and read Canelo's comments before he fought Triple G, he said himself, I'm not a true middleweight.
Facts.
Those were his words. Right. I'm not a true middleweight. Mm-hmm. And so I'm trying to understand how, and maybe, hey, listen, man, Eddie Reynoso, man, maybe he has, because he's now attracted the talents of Virgil Ortiz Jr., right. Who's a young, prominent star. So maybe Virgil Ortiz, man, I mean, not Virgil Ortiz, but Eddie Reynoso has something in his camp that, hey, it's a secret and everybody's coming there to, to learn certain techniques or whatnot. But for me, it's just a situation where I don't understand why nobody's looking at like, hey man, this guy's getting a lot stronger. And boxing doesn't typically work like that, where you put on more muscle and you're just this big, power puncher. Right. Now, don't get me wrong. He was strong at 147. He was strong at 154, but it's on another level now where the expectation has shifted from Canelo, from it being, oh, it's going to be a good fight, to, oh, he's always going to knock this guy out.
Right.
And he's banking on now, oh, no matter who it is, I can knock you out. And it makes me pause a little bit when I hear the words of a guy who, when he was, the topic of Triple G was broached before he made his jump to middleweight, was, oh, I'm not a true middleweight. And which is why he was fighting all those catchweights, Amir Khan, and that sort of thing. And so, granted, he could have grown to his body and things like that. But any of you fans out there, educate me on any fighter that has jumped that many weight classes and their power has only increased. And they're, I just want to know, because we've seen Roy Jones, right? Probably one of the greatest talents we've ever seen. Mm-hmm. His knockouts slowed down. We see Manny Pacquiao, his knockouts slowed down.
Right.
As Floyd Mayweather went up in weight classes, his knockouts slowed down. Like it happens for every fighter. As you move up, stiffer competition, heavier weights, your power typically doesn't translate like that. Maybe Canelo's special. I mean, not maybe, he is special, but I don't know. I would just like an explanation. Like, how did you become this such intimidating puncher now when before you were like, I'm not even true middleweight? So I'll let you go ahead and take it home, man, and you can clean up the topic and take us on in.
And again, this is not taking anything away from the skill of Canelo Alvarez.
Yeah, right? Definitely not. Yeah.
I'm just challenging people and calling it fair, because I'm speaking out for the plethora of other fighters who they're probably not going to say anything, because right now, let's keep it real. Canelo is the money man.
Yeah, it's somebody. Yeah. Right. We're about to get so much hate. Whoever comes by in the comment section, oh man, we're about to get like 30 thumbs down because we're talking against the king right now. But truth is truth.
And the thing is, the truth is truth. And I would just dare anybody that at the end of the day, just lay out what fighter you think this quick would end up being. Everybody would sweep under the rug that they tested positive for clenbuterol and for a steroid. And I don't think it would happen. Now, to my last point of how right now, if we're going to talk about him being pound for pound, I say he has it by default. For me, he has it by default only because a Terence Bud Crawford needs a couple of more valid names on his resume. Personally, I am a person that I feel like if Terence Bud Crawford knocks off Sean Porter and then maybe gets Errol Spence or Keith Thurman in the spring, me personally, I'm going to keep it real. Terence Bud Crawford, then in my book, I would put him at the top. Because for me, I'm sorry, fans out there, but right now, this close to him getting popped for steroids, I'm sorry. I got to keep it fair. I'm not putting a man who got popped for steroids at #1 pound for pound. I think it's absolutely egregious, and I think no other fighter could get away with it, man. But that's how I think he's by default right now, because Bud Crawford, you can make the argument that he lacks those names, a couple more names on his resume, and you can't really put him there.
Yeah, and to be fair, Tyson Fury's kind of dodged criticism, but if you look on the Twitter sphere, YouTube, there's a lot of accusations and people are bringing up, the wild boar incident. So he hasn't been shielded from the shrapnel of some past indiscretions or tainted beef. Right. But we're talking about the guys, man. We're talking about, I mentioned Tyson Fury, I mentioned blah, 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 blah. This man, look, Tyson Fury and Wilder were fighters